Quickly! I have to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of energy to get this episode of End Credits running. There we go. Now, roll titles! Well, if you hadn't gotten the clue from that little opening skit, yes, we're going to be doing Back to the Future. The entire trilogy. Yes, we are. And we're going to kick it off with, obviously, the first one. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Anyway, before we do, a few facts and figures. Now, the film was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who would do all three of the movies. Now, the film was released on the 3rd of July, 1985, and had a budget of 19 million. When it finally finished, it grossed a whopping $381,906,762. So, let's get on with it. For me, Back to the Future is one of those movies you can't just switch your brain off and just let it happen. You have to invest in it. It's actually quite an intelligent movie as far as I'm concerned. It's described as a comedy film. It's not a laugh. It's not like one of those kind of films where you have full-blown belly laughs. More like light-hearted adventure romps. That's probably the best way to describe it. But this doesn't take anything away from the film. It's still a cracking movie. And you've got fantastic performances by Michael J. Fox, who was still doing Family Ties at the time. In fact, he had to cut between filming that TV show and Back to the Future because there was an overrun and he was wrecked at the end of it. Christopher Lloyd is Dr. Emmett Brown. Now, the only time I ever seen Chris Lloyd was in Taxi when he played Jim in it. Now, to see him play this eccentric, manic character probably wasn't that far away from his own character, except Jim was a bit more laid back, but he still had that kind of whoa, sort of. So, but Doc was fantastic. You've got George McFly, who was played by Crispin Glover. Now, he only played George in one movie, and there was some kind of legal dispute, and then it just kind of blew off from there. But you've also got Tom Wilson, who played Biff Tannen, and yeah, Biff is a jerk. He's the kind of guy you just wish you could just slap happy if you knew he wasn't going to belt you one. But amazingly, I've seen videos of Tom doing musical skits, and it's actually quite funny. So they really hit out well with this. And you've got James Tolkien, who plays Mr. Strickland, and he's a kind of teacher, warden, principal that, yeah, he is a bit kind of strict, and we all know a teacher who was like that. Unfortunately, we can probably go through our own memories and kind of go, yeah, I knew someone who was like that. As for the movie itself, it's quite simple. You've got Doc, who has invented a time machine, and he's built it out of a DeLorean. Why not? Well, the DeLorean was a fantastic car, and to this day, I still maintain it's a fantastic looking car, even when it isn't you see copies made up as the Time Machine. But it's a fantastic story, and it's one of those kind of stories, as I said in the beginning, you have to invest yourself. You can't just switch off and just let it happen. You've got to keep track. First, Marty goes back in time, then he's got to try and find a way to get back in time, but also find a way to restore the timeline which has been compromised. And that is not an easy task. All in all, it is fantastic. It really is. It's edge of your seat stuff. You're wondering, how are they going to get this all solved? And it is fantastic. I enjoyed every minute of it. And it was quite ironic that I never saw this film initially in cinema. We actually hired it on videotape when it came out at first. And I was quite curious about how the fact that it ended with the words, "to be continued." Now, it could have ended the way that it did. It could have just had Marty going off with Doc to another adventure somewhere. And they could have ended it like that. We may not see another thing, but we know that they're still out there doing the time traveling bit. But the producers were a little bit canny and went, well, we could probably get another film out of this. So this is probably a sort of, if you want to know what happened next, you've got to give us another movie. And they did 5 years later, and by golly, did we get a movie. The movie itself, Back to the Future 1, was brilliant. I loved every minute of it. To Marty inventing rock and roll. Well, I say he invented it, but we know how it all came along, and it was fantastic. Is there any faults in it? I really can't think of anything. As I said, it's not a film that you just sit half asleep watching. You've got to invest. Otherwise, you might lose track of what's going on, because it's a lot going on. It juggles a lot, but it manages it brilliantly. And it became the hit that it obviously did. And I am not one to say, this was a hit for me. Well, that's my review over. I'll be doing Back to the Future 2 in my next edition. So until then, I'll see you then in the next edition of End Credits.